The arrival at the alien medical Bajak's first thought was that he was dead. Everything felt too quiet, too soft, too warm. The last thing he remembered was the asteroid field. Rocks spinning like knives. Alarms screaming in his helmet. The mining vessel shaking apart around him. Then, nothing. Now, he was lying on something that felt like a bed, but not the kind humans made. It was shaped to his body. And it pulsed faintly, as if alive. A faint light glowed above him, not from a bulb, but from some kind of floating crystal. He tried to move his head, but a soft pressure held it still. Voices whispered nearby, strange and musical. Words flowing together like a song he didn't understand. Shapes moved in the haze of his blurred vision, tall figures with thin limbs. A few smaller ones darting between them. Then he saw her, at first. He thought it was a child. She was no taller than 4 feet, covered in soft fur that shimmered. Between gold and brown, her eyes were a bright, unnatural yellow that seemed to glow. Her ears twitched toward every sound, and her tail swayed lazily behind her as she approached. She wore a simple medical wrap and a belt with small tools hanging from it. She leaned close, studying him with quick, sharp glances. Her nose twitched, and then she spoke in accented but clear English. "Human, you are in the care of the Kavara. Medical Bay? I am your nurse. You will relax." Before Jack could answer, she hopped lightly onto the edge of his bed. Then, to his complete shock, she climbed onto his chest. He froze. What was she doing? Was this normal? Her hands, small but strong, pressed along his ribs, his collarbone, his shoulders. He tried to speak. Excuse me? Quiet, she said, without looking up. She moved with the precision of someone who had done this hundreds of times. Her weight barely noticeable. Jack's heart raced, but not from fear alone. He was confused. Why would a nurse climb on her patient? From the corner of his eye, he noticed the other alien medics watching, some exchanging glances. Others smirking in a way that made him uneasy. It was as if they knew something he didn't. The nurse pulled a small tube from her belt, squeezed a glowing blue gel onto her palm, and began spreading it across his shoulder wherever it touched. The pain in his muscles vanished almost instantly. She worked silently, occasionally muttering in her own language, low, rapid words he couldn't catch. Once he thought he heard her say perfect body heat. But maybe he imagined it. Jack tried to lift his head to look at her. But she pushed his forehead back down with surprising strength. "You move, you." "Tear muscle again," she said. "Stay." Her tail brushed across his arm as she shifted her position. Now kneeling on his stomach to reach his chest, her golden eyes kept flicking up to his face, as if checking for signs of pain, despite her strange methods. Jack began to realize she was extremely skilled. She knew exactly where to press to stop the aches. Exactly how much weight to put on his body without hurting him. Still, there was something about the way she worked, close, personal, almost familiar, that made him feel uneasy. He cleared his throat. "Do you have to be this close?" She didn't answer, only adjusted her grip and pressed her ear against his chest. Listening to his heartbeat, her ears twitched, and her tail gave a slow, satisfied flick. "Healthy," she murmured. Almost to herself. "Very good." The other medics whispered again, and Jack caught a word he recognized. Bond. What did that mean? Why would a medical treatment require a bond? The nurse finally climbed down from him, but instead of stepping away, she sat on the bed beside his hip, her tail curling around his leg like a snake. "You will sleep now," she said firmly. "I will watch." Jack stared at her, unsure whether he had just received the strangest medical exam in the galaxy. But as the glowing crystal dimmed above him and the soft hum of the bed lulled him into drowsiness, one thought stayed in his mind. This nurse wasn't just here to treat him. She was here for something more. And whatever it was, she wasn't planning to leave his side. Jack woke to the sound of soft humming. It wasn't mechanical. It was a voice, low and steady, carrying a strange melody. His eyes opened to find the tiny beast woman nurse perched cross-legged beside him, sharpening a small, curved tool with slow, precise strokes. When she noticed he was awake, her ears flicked, and she gave a small nod. "You live," she said. Simply, "Good." Jack tried to sit up, but her hand pressed firmly on his chest. "You will not," she ordered. "Your body is not ready." Her golden eyes locked on him like a hunter watching prey. She reached into a pouch on her belt and took out a set of narrow metal rods, each tipped with glowing blue crystal. "What are those?" Jack asked. "Tools," she replied, without explanation. She climbed onto the bed again, moving with the silent grace of a predator. Instead of standing beside him like any human nurse would, she positioned herself on his thighs, her knees pinning him lightly. She began pressing the glowing rods against points on his neck, shoulders, and chest. Each touch sent a wave of heat deep into his muscles, making him gasp. The pain faded, replaced by an almost pleasant heaviness. Jack couldn't help but notice how close she was, her fur brushing his skin, her tail curling around his arm. Every now and then, she leaned in to sniff the air above his skin, as though memorizing his scent. "Ah, is this normal?" he asked. She ignored the question, instead leaning forward until her nose was just inches from his collarbone. She inhaled deeply, eyes half closed, before speaking in her own language. He caught one word, "compatible," the other medics in. The room exchanged knowing looks again. One of them whispered something, and the nurse's ears twitched in irritation. "Out," she commanded sharply. The others left without protest, leaving Jack alone with her. Now that they were alone, she changed tools, pulling out something that looked like a clawed glove. It was made of thin, flexible metal, each finger ending in a tiny hooked tip. She slid it over her hand and began tracing invisible lines across his torso. Where the tips touched, Jack felt a faint electric pulse. He flinched, but she steadied him with her other hand. "This is for the nerves," she said quietly. "I must learn how you move, how you react." Her voice had softened, and for a moment, Jack thought she sounded almost protective, but then she pressed a point just below his ribs, and his leg jerked involuntarily. She tilted her head, eyes narrowing in satisfaction. "Good reflex," she murmured. Strong. When she finished, she removed the clawed glove and sat back on his lap, studying him in silence. Jack shifted uncomfortably under her intense gaze. "Why do I feel like I'm being inspected for something else?" he asked, trying to keep his tone light. Her tail swished once, slow and deliberate. "You are," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, before he could press for more. The station lights flickered, and a distant alarm began to wail. The nurse's ears snapped forward, her entire body going tense. She grabbed his wrist, her claws lightly pricking his skin. "Stay with me," she said, her voice suddenly urgent. Whatever was happening outside, Jack could tell this examination was over, but their connection was only beginning. The alarm faded into the background as Jack realized the nurse still hadn't let go of his wrist. Her grip was small but unshakable, like steel hidden inside soft fur. She pulled him gently but firmly toward the corner of the medical bay, away from the main doors. He could hear hurried footsteps outside, the sharp hiss of alien voices giving urgent commands. "Sit," she told him, guiding him onto a low-cushioned bench. Her golden eyes scanned his face, then drifted to his chest, as if checking his breathing. "You are still weak, but your pulse is strong," she said, her voice calmer now. "That is good." Jack tried to ask what was going on, but she placed a single clawed finger over his lips, her tail wrapped loosely around his forearm, the soft fur warm against his skin. That was when he noticed it, the subtle vibration. It wasn't. The hum of the station's systems, it was coming from her. A low, steady purr, deep in her chest. It was strangely calming, almost hypnotic. And Jack felt the tension in his shoulders start to fade. "Why are you purring?" he asked quietly. Her ears flicked, and she tilted her head. "It is the bond." Jack frowned. "Bond." She nodded once. "When my kind saves a life, we begin the link. It starts with touch, scent, sound." She tapped his chest lightly and hard. Jack remembered the whispers from the other medics earlier. The word bond passed between them, so it hadn't been his imagination. But why him? He hadn't saved her. She was the one keeping him alive. Before he could ask, she shifted closer, kneeling on the bench beside him so her face was level with his. Her golden eyes held his without blinking, and the purring deepened. "My people do not choose the bond," she said softly. "It chooses us." She pressed her forehead lightly to his, her warm breath brushing his skin. Jack's first instinct was to pull away. But something about her touch froze him in place. The air between them felt charged, like static before a lightning strike. Then she began marking him. Not with ink or paint, but with scent. She brushed her cheek against his neck, her fur leaving a faint trace of warmth and smell he couldn't quite describe. It wasn't unpleasant, a mix of wild forest air and something sweet. "This way others will know," she murmured. "You are under my care." Jack swallowed. "Is this part of the treatment?" Her ears twitched in amusement. "Yes, but not for your wounds." The words made his pulse quicken. He wasn't sure whether to feel safe or trapped. Suddenly, the bay doors slammed open and a tall alien soldier stepped in, weapon in hand. His eyes landed on Jack, then narrowed. The nurse moved instantly, positioning herself between Jack and the soldier, her tail puffing out, claws unsheathed. "You will not take him," she hissed, her voice sharp and dangerous. The soldier froze, clearly surprised at her aggression. Jack realized in that moment whatever this bond was. It wasn't just symbolic to her. It was a promise to protect him with her life. And judging by the fire in her eyes, she fully intended to keep it. The alien soldier didn't lower his weapon. The nurse's tail lashed from side to side, each movement sharp and deliberate. Jack could feel the tension radiating from her small frame like a coiled spring ready to strike. The air between them felt heavy, charged with the possibility of violence. Then the sound came, not just the blaring alarm, but the deep, rattling vibration of the station's hull being struck. Something outside was attacking. The lights flickered again, then turned red, bathing the medical bay in a warning glow. The soldier shouted something in his language, pointing at Jack. The nurse responded with a growl, so low it was almost felt, not heard. In a flash, she leaped at the soldier. Her claws caught the edge of his weapon and twisted it away with surprising force. The alien stumbled back, cursing, as the nurse planted herself firmly between him and Jack. "Move," she hissed at Jack without looking at him. Now, Jack didn't need convincing. He slid off the bench, his legs shaky but holding. The nurse grabbed his hand, tugging him toward a side door. Her grip was iron, despite her small size. Each time the station shuddered from another impact, she steadied him with a quick pull, never slowing. They burst into a narrow corridor lit by emergency strips along the floor. Smoke curled from vents overhead, and the distant sound of blaster fire echoed through the metal walls. "Where are we going?" Jack asked between breaths. "Somewhere they cannot take you," she replied without turning, her ears flicking at every noise. At one intersection, a second alien soldier appeared, raising his rifle before Jack could react. The nurse vaulted forward, using the wall to spring high above the barrel. She landed on the soldier's shoulders, claws sinking into his armor joints. With a sharp yank, she pulled him off balance, sending him crashing to the floor. Jack stared. She moved like a wild animal. Fast and merciless, she snatched the fallen weapon, tossed it to Jack, and motioned for him to keep going. The corridors twisted and turned, the air thick with heat from damaged systems. Somewhere close, a bulkhead groaned. Threatening to give way, Jack's lungs burned, but the nurse's pace never faltered. When his steps slowed, she didn't scold. She simply climbed halfway onto his back, wrapping her arms around his shoulders to help push him forward. It was strange. She was light, yet her presence seemed to steady him. Each time his legs threatened to buckle, she whispered something in her language, the words sharp and rhythmic. It didn't matter that he couldn't understand the tone. Alone made him keep moving. Finally, they slipped into a small maintenance shaft, barely tall enough for Jack to crouch inside. The nurse sealed the hatch behind them with a quick tap of her claws on a panel. In the sudden quiet, Jack could hear his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. The nurse leaned against him, her breathing steady despite the sprint, her golden eyes. Studied him closely. "You will live," she said at last, her voice calm again. "As long as you stay with me." Jack wasn't sure if it was a promise or a warning. But one thing was certain. Whatever danger lay ahead, she had no intention of letting him face it alone. The maintenance shaft was dim and narrow, metal walls pressed close around them. Carrying the faint vibration of distant impacts, Jack leaned against one side, catching his breath. While the nurse crouched in front of the sealed hatch, her ears twitching at every sound for the first time since the alarms began. There was no rush. The silence between them felt heavy. Jack finally broke it. "You've been protecting me since I woke up. You fought off armed soldiers. You pulled me out of danger. Why?" The nurse didn't answer right away. Her golden eyes flicked to his face, searching it as if deciding how much to reveal. Then she spoke, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. "Because I owe a debt." Jack frowned. "A debt? To me?" "We've never met before." Her tail curled around her ankles, and she looked away for a moment, as though remembering something far away. "Not to you," she said quietly. "To your kind. Years ago," she explained, "there had been a war. On the Kivara border worlds, her people were losing, cities burning, families scattered. She had been only a young trainee in the Healer's Corps when an enemy raid broke through their defenses. Cornered in the rubble of a collapsed medical ward, she had thought death was certain. Then, a human soldier appeared, not part of her world, not part of her war. He had been passing through the system on a relief mission when he stumbled upon the burning city. She remembered his face, determined, dirt-streaked, bleeding from a wound in his side. Without hesitation, he had lifted the debris trapping her, carried her on his back, and fought his way out through streets full of fire and gunshots. "He died before I could even thank him," she said, her voice almost breaking. Jack felt something twist in his chest. "My people do not forget such things," she continued. "We swore that if ever a human was in our care, we would protect them. As they protected us." Her gaze returned to his, sharp now, but not unkind. "When I saw you in the mining wreckage, bleeding and broken, I knew," she said. "This was my turn to repay the debt." Jack sat in silence, unsure what to say. The story was simple, but the weight behind it was immense. It wasn't just duty for her, it was honor, tradition, and perhaps something deeper she wasn't ready to name. Before he could respond, a muffled boom shook the shaft. Dust drifted down from the ceiling, and the faint light strips flickered. The nurse's ears shot forward, and she was instantly alert again. "They are still searching," she whispered. "We must move." She reached out, taking his hand once more. Her grip was firm, but warm. Jack realized that even if the debt was the reason she had started protecting him, it wasn't the only reason anymore. There was a bond forming here, one neither of them had planned, but neither seemed willing to break. Without another word, she led him deeper into the shadows of the maintenance tunnels. And Jack followed, knowing that whatever lay ahead, he wasn't facing it alone. The maintenance tunnels, twisted like a maze. Each turn brought a new sound, distant footsteps. The hiss of damaged pipes, the sharp crack of weapons fire somewhere above. Jack kept his head low, following the nurse's quick, silent movements. She moved on all fours now. Her small frame perfect for slipping through the narrow spaces, her ears turning like radar dishes to catch every sound. At last, they reached a grated vent. Through it, Jack could see the main corridor wide. Well lit and swarming with enemy soldiers, they were searching every room. Dragging out wounded medics and patients, Jack's gut tightened. There's no way through. He whispered. The nurse's tail flicked once. There is, she replied. But we must hit first, before Jack could ask what she meant. She pulled a small device from her belt, a sphere covered in faintly glowing lines. She twisted it sharply, and it began to hum. What is that? Jack asked. Noise, she said with a sly smile, very loud noise. She tossed the sphere down the tunnel behind them, and a few seconds later, the air was filled with a shrieking, metallic howl. The sound bounced through the pipes and vents, making it impossible to tell where it came from. The soldiers below tensed, some shouting orders, others moving away to investigate. The nurse wasted no time. She slipped through the grate like water. Dropping silently to the floor, Jack followed less gracefully, landing with a grunt. Before he could steady himself, she had already dashed ahead, climbing the wall like it was nothing, from above. She dropped onto a lone soldier at the rear of the group, her claws hooking into the weak spots of his armor. The man went down hard, and she yanked a blaster from his belt, tossing it to Jack. Cover me, she ordered. Jack gripped the weapon, heavier than anything he had used before, and took position at a corner. Two soldiers turned at the sound of their comrade falling, but Jack fired first. The recoil slamming into his shoulder, both dropped, their weapons skittering across the floor. The nurse moved like a shadow, leaping from wall to wall. Claws and teeth flashing in quick, controlled strikes. Every target she hit went down without a chance to shout. They moved together now. Jack covering the open angles, the nurse striking from above or behind. It was strange. They had only known each other a short time, but their movements felt almost coordinated. When Jack's fire drew attention, she would flank. When she was cornered, he would blast the enemy from behind, within minutes. The corridor was clear. The nurse gave a sharp nod, her chest rising and falling with quick breaths. You fight well, she said simply. Not as clumsy as you look, Jack smirked. And you fight like you've been doing this your whole life. Her ears flicked in amusement. I have. A sudden tremor ran through the floor, heavier than before. The walls groaned, and somewhere far off, metal tore with a deep, horrible screech. The nurse's eyes narrowed. The station will not hold much longer, she said. We must reach the escape pods. She didn't wait for a reply. With a flick of her tail, she was already moving. Jack followed, his blaster still warm in his hands. He had no idea if they could make it in time, but he knew one thing. He wasn't letting her fight the rest of this battle alone. The escape pod bay was just ahead. Jack could see the reinforced doors through the haze of smoke and flickering lights, but they weren't alone. A squad of enemy soldiers blocked the way, weapons raised, their armor catching the red emergency glow. The nurse didn't hesitate. She pressed a clawed hand against Jack's chest, pushing him into cover behind a fallen support beam. Stay low, she whispered, her golden eyes burning with focus. Jack opened his mouth to argue, but she was already moving, small, fast, and silent. A streak of fur and muscle weaving between debris. The first soldier didn't even see her coming. She leaped, claws finding the gap between helmet and chest plate, pulling him down with a snarl. Jack took the shot at another soldier who turned to fire at her. His blaster bolt punching through the enemy's side, the air filled with the smell of scorched metal and ozone. They fought like they had in the corridor, a perfect rhythm. She struck from above. He covered from below every time danger came close. One of them was there to drive it back, but then a deep rumble shook the floor. The ceiling above the pod bay cracked, sending down a shower of sparks and dust. "We're out of time," Jack shouted. The nurse darted toward the control panel beside the pod doors. Her claws danced over the keys, entering codes too fast for Jack to follow. A heavy clang sounded as the locks disengaged, and the doors began to grind open. "Inside," she ordered. Jack jumped in, turning to see her still outside, claws buried in the panel's wiring. "Hurry," he called, but she didn't move until the override completed, sealing the pod behind them so no enemy could follow. Only then did she leap in, slamming the hatch closed. The pod jolted as it launched through the small viewport. Jack watched the station shrink behind them, its hull breaking apart in bursts of fire. The nurse slumped against the wall, her fur singed in places. But her eyes were steady. "You are safe now," she said quietly. Jack exhaled, his body finally relaxing. "You didn't have to stay behind to finish that lock," he said. "You could have been killed." Her ears twitched, and she gave a faint, tired smile. "I told you, human, the debt must be paid, and the bond must be kept." She stepped closer, her tail curling gently around his arm. "In my people's ways, a bond like this does not end," she said softly. "Not after danger, not after distance, not even after years." Jack looked at her for a long moment, the weight of her words sinking in. "So you're saying you're stuck with me?" he asked with a faint grin. Her eyes gleamed, and she answered simply, "No, you are stuck with me." The pod drifted into the dark void. Two unlikely allies, a human miner and a tiny beast woman nurse, bound by honor, by battle, and something far deeper. Whatever came next, neither of them would face it alone.